Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, two Timberwolves players who will see drastic role changes next year. I'll tell you who they are, why, and what will change about their roles. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. And when you enter promo code LockedOnNBA, they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. A lot to get to today. I want to talk about the two players on the Wolves roster that will have the largest role changes next year. Two players who I believe will be on the team next year. So let's dig into that here. First, though, a big thank you off the top for making this show your first listen every single day. This show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. You can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch the show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. More great local sports covers 24/7 for free. This show and all the other Locked On Minnesota podcasts. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves, and also my account, which is at Beecken. That's with two B's, two E's, CKEN. All right, we're only a little less than 3 weeks away from the NBA draft now, and 3 weeks. Is my counter off? I don't know. 3 weeks from the NBA draft. That sounds right to me. Anyway, we're getting a lot closer to the NBA draft. We're going to get into a lot more draft talk. Obviously, the Timberwolves have they have the 53rd pick in the draft. That's it. They don't have any first round selections. It seems unlikely they'll trade in unless there is one of these, potential Karl-Anthony Towns trades. It's actually 2 weeks away. Sorry, I had an extra week in there. 2 weeks from yesterday, Thursday the 22nd is the draft. I do want to spend some time the next couple of weeks talking about the number 4 pick. Could the Wolves trade with the Rockets for number 4? I want to talk about the number 53 pick, some possibilities. It's a little bit like throwing darts for late in the second round, but who are players that I like potentially late in the draft, or, talking two-way undrafted guys, summer league signees, just names that I like who could be available at the end of the second round or as undrafted free agents following the draft. So we'll get into some more draft stuff, but today I want to talk about a couple of players, one of whom was not in the rotation this year that I think will make an impact next year, and the other who was in the rotation, but I think will have a very different role next season. So let's start with the latter, a player who was not in the rotation at all this year, and that is last year's second-round selection, Josh Minott. The Timberwolves acquired him on draft night last year. He was the 15th pick of the second round by the Charlotte Hornets. The Wolves acquired him in one of the 3 or 4 draft night trades that they swung last June. And I did the season review for Minott like a month ago, and it was pretty. I kept it to one segment, and it was fairly high level, but I laid out the case for why I thought he should be in the rotation next year and why I really like him as a prospect. I want to do that again and add a little bit more detail, a little more color to it, talk a little more about his season in the G League and things that I think he will and can improve. Also, his role with the Wolves. I think there's a real chance that Josh Minott is a rotation player this season for the Timberwolves, this upcoming season, 23-24. Minott is I think there's a chance he takes Taurean Prince's, essentially his rotation minutes. Now, there's differences, and we'll get into that. Prince is really more of a 3 that occasionally played some small ball 4. Minott is really kind of a 4 that, ideally he's a 3. Like they're different players in a lot of respects. Prince is obviously a much better shooter. He's a veteran. He's got that toughness, the locker room presence. Minott doesn't have all of those things. I should also point out Prince has that non-guaranteed money for next year, around $9 million. The Wolves have to make a decision the week of the NBA draft whether or not Prince will be back. So at this point, I think it's actually pretty likely that they guarantee his money for next year, but it's always possible they trade him. whether that is draft night, they trade him for a pick, or in the wake of, at some point in July to free up a roster spot / cap space, perhaps as part of a larger deal. Like, I, I don't know. Prince, at this point, it feels 50-50 to me that he's back. If he's not, I think he takes those minutes. If he's not, he takes those minutes. If he is, I mean, if Naz Reid leaves, there's some backup 4 minutes available. And I know Chris Finch wants to play big, and that's kind of the Wolves' plan. Obviously, if Rudy Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns, Josh Minott can also play the 4 because of his size and his wingspan. So let's start there, and then we'll dig into the role a little bit. Minott's profile is he's 6'8", and he's got a 6'11" wingspan. He is big. And he only played 1 year in college. He's a little bit older as a freshman, so he's already 20. I believe he turns 21. Actually, I think I've got it right here. Let's see. He's 20. Yeah, he turns 21 in November, so he's a little older for a 1 year college player, but he's still only 20, so he may not be done growing. 6'8" with a 6'11" wingspan, and he's super athletic. Some of the dunks he had in the G League this year, it's not hard to find those highlights on Twitter, on YouTube. Go check them out. He was a monster, and actually in college too, at Memphis. Just a really, really athletic, long, impressive player. And the way I've described him in the past is kind of like a pogo stick in terms of his athleticism. I think like talent-wise, you could have made the case that he had lottery-level talent, but he wasn't a consistent player on a fairly middle of the road, that's being generous, college program at Memphis. He wasn't even playing that much at the end of his lone season at Memphis, which is crazy because of how good he was, especially on the defensive end of the floor. So let's talk about the defense. In college, Josh Minott had a 3.1% steal rate. Now, for some context, not apples to apples, we're talking, how many games did he play? 33 games, but he only started 5. He played less than 500 minutes, 483 minutes in college, which works out to about 15 minutes per game at the college level. So the sample size is small, and college is different than the NBA. But he had a 3.1% steal rate, which is absurd. That would have led the NBA this season, a 3.1% steal rate. Think about that. His block rate was 5.4%. This is a guy who's 6'8", and profiles as a 3-4 kind of hybrid forward. He had a block rate of 5.4%. Again, for context, in the NBA this season, this would be 9th. And all the guys ahead of him are bigs, right? It's Walker Kessler, it's Nick Claxton, it's Miles Turner, a handful of guys who are pretty, I think there actually are all centers who would have been ahead of him in the NBA with a block rate of 5.4%. Again, not apples to apples, a relatively small sample size. But what does that tell us? Especially with somebody who we know is big, is long, is athletic, plays a primary defensive position on the perimeter, and also is, as a wing, think about Jaden McDaniels, right? Actually, there's a lot of similarities in this profile here. Josh Minott, the steal rate and the block rate shows the level of activity that he had as a collegiate player. And those skills are extremely transferable to the NBA. Steal rate and block rate are two of the best predictors of future NBA success on the defensive end of the floor. For some additional context, look at what Jaden McDaniels did at Washington. Now, again, this isn't apples to apples either. McDaniels started 21 games. He played almost twice as many minutes in college in his one season as Josh Minott did. He played at a Power 5 school in the Pac-12, whereas Minott played at Memphis. So, not quite the same thing there either. But they each played 1 year in college. I mentioned Minott's 3.1% steal rate. McDaniels in his 1 year at college, 1.4%. Minott's block rate, 5.4%. McDaniels still crazy, but it's 4.9%. So he had more than twice the steal rate that Jaden McDaniels did. Minott had more than twice the steal rate. And he had a block rate that was a half a point better, 5.4% versus 4.9% as, like seasons, freshman years in college. So to give some context for the activity level, the nature of how Josh Minott defends and how he did it in college, that's serious. You're talking about a guy with the length and athleticism to make an impact at the professional level, which, by the way, I didn't talk when I did his player season review. I didn't talk a ton about about his G League stats. I want to do that a little bit. I want to talk about rebounding, and I want to talk about why I think his presence could be so important for the Wolves this next season in 23-24. So we're going to do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at Birddogs. Birddogs, put simply, they make you look good. Birddogs are stretch khaki shorts that are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. They're absolutely comfortable. The way I like to describe it is they actually feel like you're wearing. You can get them with a liner in them, and it feels like you're wearing basketball shorts, like you're going to go work out or lounge around the house, whatever. But they look good. They fit way better than regular shorts, like regular shorts that are made of stiff, restricting cotton or whatever material. But Birddogs fixed this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. They also use anti-stink, sweat-wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. Birddogs are comfortable. My favorite thing this weekend, I'm going to wear them. Saturday, I think we're going to go hiking in the morning. I'm going to wear them to go hiking. I'm going to wear them, stop at the store on the way home. I'm going to wear them around the house. I'm going to wear them if I go back to the store in the afternoon. Whatever it is, it's all day long. They're comfortable like you're wearing gym shorts, but they have pockets to put your keys, your wallet, your phone, whatever. And they look good. It doesn't look like you're wearing basketball shorts everywhere. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA and enter the promo code LockedOnNBA. You'll get a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. I got one with my order. It's fantastic. It does function like a Yeti. It's birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you that. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Everydayers will be back on Monday. Again, Monday through Friday next week. We will get into some more draft talk. I have to keep digging into some of these late second round undrafted. I'm working on some profiles of some of those players and guys who I'd like the Wolves to target. So we'll do more of that next week as we get much closer to the draft. Again, we're now within 2 weeks. I lost a week in there somewhere, as I realized earlier in the show. So here we go. Let's get ready for draft night, even if it is likely or less likely to be as eventful as recent or many Wolves draft nights in the past. You never know. And even still, there almost certainly will be a new Timberwolf to talk about after the draft here in a couple of weeks. So stay tuned for all that discussion here moving forward. Let's keep talking about Josh Minott. So I talked already about his steal rate, his block rate, his size, athleticism, length, all those things. Let's talk briefly about his rebounding before we get to some of the G League stats. Josh Minott in college had a 14.4% total rebound rate, which would be like top 30-ish or so in the NBA this season, total rebound rate. Again, for context, because I did this before on the other stats, Jaden McDaniels in college at 10.6% rebound rate. Minott, size-wise, athleticism-wise, some of the defensive skill is similar to McDaniels, but he's a better rebounder than Jaden McDaniels. He was in college. He has been in the G League, better than McDaniels has been as a pro. We'll talk about G League again here in a minute. But an overall 14.4% rebound rate in college, and his offensive rebound rate would have been top 10 in the NBA this year. In college, Minott's offensive rebound rate, 12.9%, which is a really impressive number. This year in the G League, Josh Minott. So the G League, again, it was weird. They had the regular season games, they had the Showcase Cup. Combined, Minott played 20 games in the G League for the Iowa Wolves this last season, his first year as a pro. Some of the stats, I can't find them combined, like some of the rate-based stats, but the G League website does. You can combine them for some of the stats. He had a total rebound rate of 11.6%, which is lower, obviously, than the 14.4 he had in college, but it's still higher than Jaden McDaniels in college. It's still for some context, when I say it was 11.6% overall, that would have been ahead of Kyle Anderson on the Timberwolves this year and only a little behind Karl-Anthony Towns, well ahead of Jaden McDaniels, who's 7.1%. Again, G League, not the NBA, only 20 games, but still, that's a total rebound rate that would have only been behind Rudy Gobert, Naz Reid, and Karl-Anthony Towns as far as regular rotation guys. I mean, Garza would have been up there. Actually, Minott also in only 15 games, less than 100 minutes, would have himself at the NBA level. I don't cite his NBA stats otherwise because it was 15 games, 96 minutes total. But at the NBA level, he was only behind Gobert and Naz on the Timberwolves roster, ahead of Garza, ahead of Towns, ahead of Kyle Anderson. But again, in the G League, an 11.4% rebound rate this season. He also had a competitive is not the right word, but a decent assist rate, 11.1%, which is, more than you would expect to see at the G League level from him. In college, he was 12.8%. He's not going to be initiating much offense, certainly not right away at the NBA level, but that's nice, right? It's a nice indicator of offensive activity level, knowledge of ball movement, et cetera, for a guy who they're not running plays for necessarily. Again, at the G League, 20 games played for the Iowa Wolves. He averaged 19.1 points per game, shot 54% from the field, and 36% from beyond the arc. In college, Josh Minott only attempted 14 threes and made 2 of them. So he was 14% on 14 3-point attempts at the college level. In the G League this year, he attempted 3 per game, 2.9 per game, 36%, which is nearly NBA league average, and much higher than league average was just a couple of years ago. So that's a competitive number. And another thing that kind of suggests that he may be a decent shooter eventually is he shot 75% from the free throw line at college, 75.4% to be precise. He was exactly 75% at the G League this year. So his 1 year in college, his 1 year in the G League, again, it's a total of like 53 games total between those 2 seasons, but 75% at the line. In the G League, 36% beyond the arc. The jumper has a hitch in it. It's not beautiful, but clearly there's some scoring touch. There's some shooting ability that can be tapped into further for Josh Minott. And that is an exciting upside. One of my favorite comps for him, and this isn't body type isn't exactly the same, but there's some similarities. I like the Brandon Clark comp, of course, the Memphis Grizzlies, because he's that type of a player, an activity player, an offensive rebound guy, active defensively. I think he's going to be more effective on the perimeter than Brandon Clark. I also think he's got more offensive upside, and can play more like a wing than Brandon Clark. I think Minott probably plays a lot of 4 next year for the Wolves. Maybe not a lot of 4, but I think that's where he sees more of his minutes is at the 4. But long term, if he develops some of the skills, the way we've seen Jaden McDaniels do it over the last couple of seasons, he becomes more of a 3 and plays more as a wing than Brandon Clark. But that type of a player, a do-it-all player with activity, athleticism, size, offensive rebounding ability, that is super important for what the Wolves need. And one of the reasons why I think he finds a rotation role for Minnesota next year is he would give them a little bit of that. And I don't know about if edge is the right word, because I haven't seen Josh Minott play at the NBA level enough to know if he's going to really play with an edge. But the activity level and toughness, stick-to-itiveness is a word I like to question mark that I like. Is it a word that I like to use to describe some of the players that play like this? Minott has the qualities that Jared Vanderbilt has, and in some ways, what he could bring to the rotation is kind of a mix, a hybrid, if you will, of Patrick Beverley and Jared Vanderbilt, right? Like, he's got some more positional flexibility and offensive skill than Jared Vanderbilt does. And he's obviously not a guard that's going to initiate like Patrick Beverley, but he's got a few more of those offensive skills that Pat Bev had in his prime and had more of in Minnesota than he did last year in Los Angeles and Chicago. But the nose for the ball defensively, the playing at a breakneck speed, kind of a kamikaze on defense, the work on the glass as Jared Vanderbilt. I think in one package, he kind of gives you a little bit of what each of those guys gave Minnesota last season. 21-22. And I would expect him to have the impact next year that either one of those guys did in the Wolves' 47-win season in 21-22. But that's kind of that thing, however you want to quantify it, that was missing in 22-23. The edge, the activity, deflections, steal rate, offensive. Well, really, Vanderbilt. I guess pound for pound rebounding in general. The ability to play some different defensive coverages, to be a little more switchable on the perimeter with bigs, to blitz if you want to blitz. Not that the Wolves would do that much with Rudy, but like if Minott's on the floor, they could mix their pick and roll coverages a bit more, play more high wall than they did last year with after trading Jared Vanderbilt. All that to say, there's a lot about the profile of Josh Minott that is really attractive. The downsides, of course, are there isn't much of a shooting track record to speak of, but as I already detailed, there's some touch there that's intriguing. Defensively, he's actually not. I want to. I don't want to oversell his defense. I think there's some issues with him as a one-on-one defender. I think sometimes he looks a little bit. I don't want to say slow, but maybe like a quarter step slow when guys are putting the ball on the floor. Watching back some of the stuff in the G League this year, maybe a little bit not as fluid as you'd like him to be, but with the size and athleticism that he has, as he gets more reps at the pro level, I think he's going to be effective. He may not be as fluid as Jaden McDaniels. He may always be a better team defender than an individual one-on-one defender, but especially if he's playing at the 4, that's not a huge deal, right? Like you can involve him in switch actions on the perimeter and be comfortable with that, with him as a 4. He's going to need to improve some of that fluidity and the anticipation maybe to be more successful as a one-on-one isolation defender at the 3 at the NBA level. But again, the size, the athleticism, the wingspan, the off-ball defense, steal rate, block rate, the activity level, as I keep saying, is so important. I think he can do all of those things. I really, really do. And even though he's a very different player from Taurean Prince, like you look at the guys that are possibly not going to be back, Jalen Noel will not be. He's mostly a 2. Taurean Prince, 50-50. He plays mostly the 3, but can play some 4. Naz Reid was a 4/5. Naz may be gone. Between those guys all leaving, possibly, there's minutes to pick up for Josh Minott. And if Naz Reid's gone, I mean, they'll probably pick up another big. They'll sign a vet or whatever. But Josh Minott's your guy. Like he is going to pick up those minutes at the 4. He should pick up those minutes at the 4. Fully expect him to be the guy. Nobody knew who Jared Vanderbilt was, except for NBA draft nerds and Kentucky fans, right? A couple of years ago. And now that he's played for the Lakers, of course, everybody loves Jared Vanderbilt. Like, all the national shows, the podcasts, everybody loves Jared Vanderbilt. Or they might have seen him last year when the Wolves played Memphis in the playoffs. I remember hearing that on the national shows, like, I like this Jared Vanderbilt. Josh Minott is that type of a player. Doesn't have the ball handling skills maybe as Vando. Doesn't quite have the build as Vando that Vando has. But there's things he does better. The offensive touch, as I mentioned, I think he's overall going to be a better rebounder. Maybe not pound for pound rebounder, a better offensive rebounder at least. More shooting touch. He's the type of player that 11 months from now in the playoffs next year, I think he's a rotation guy, and nationally people are like, man, this Josh Minott, where'd he come from? And that's the type of player I think he is. So expect him to get some additional or to really be part of the rotation next year, to see more minutes for the Wolves next season. All right, let's close the show by talking about another player who was in the rotation last year. I just simply think we'll have a bit of a role shift. So we'll do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel throughout the NBA Finals. Right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Of course, the Finals is 2-1 now. Miami's got to win Game 4 really before it kicks back to Denver. They've got to even this series. I'm I think Miami's gonna. The line will be. I think Denver will be favored, but Miami's going to have a shot. I think it's an interesting line to look at FanDuel for Game 4 if you're interested in putting anything on Miami. Now's the time because it's effectively a must-win for them. FanDuel throughout the finals has great promotions every single day. It's a safe and secure app. You can get paid instantly. So go check out that finals line for Game 4. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockdown and get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. Again, $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockdown. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right. A Timberwolves rotation player from last year who I feel will have a different role. Kyle Anderson. Slow-mo was already, and this is an indictment, yes, on the Timberwolves' history of free agent signings, is one of the best 2 or 3 free agent signings in franchise history. Had something close to a career season last year for the Wolves in his age 29 season. But there's some things about his year that I think were a function more of the circumstance of the Karl-Anthony Towns injury more than anything else. For instance, he started the year coming off the bench because the Timberwolves were starting Karl-Anthony Towns at the 4, Rudy at the 5, of course, Jaden McDaniels, Anthony Edwards, and D'Angelo Russell at the start of the season. After Towns' injury, Anderson became more of a regular member of the starting lineup. He ended up playing in 69 games. He's played in exactly 69 games each of the last 3 seasons, by the way, and 67 the year before that. So remarkably consistent in terms of number of games played, even if it isn't, even if he's missing 13 games a year or whatever. I guess less than that because one of those was a shortened season. Anyway, he started 46 games, which was the third most games he's ever started in a season in his 9-year NBA career. But his role shifted. He played more 4 than I think the Wolves were expecting him to play simply because of the Towns injury. The Wolves had to have Kyle Anderson on the floor, and that's where he fit best. So how does his role change next season? Well, one, I think he plays a little more at the 3. And to be clear, he hasn't played primarily the 3 since the first COVID shortened season. So 4 seasons ago, the 1920 season in Memphis, he played about 2/3 of his minutes at small forward, according to Basketball Reference. He hasn't played more than 10% of his minutes at the 3 since that season. He's played almost exclusively the 4. And in Memphis, the last 2 years with the Grizzlies, he played a ton of small ball 5. Well, the Wolves saw that against them in the playoffs in April and May of 22. Kyle Anderson playing the 5 gave the Wolves some fits. He didn't do that very often in Minnesota. 90% of his minutes, according to Basketball Reference, were spent at power forward. I do think that's still his primary role next year with the Wolves, but I think he plays a little more at the 3 simply by virtue of he's going to be one of the Wolves' best 6 players, but so are Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, and they both have to be on the floor. And if Naz Reid is back, now you're talking about 4 of the Wolves' best 7 players, all ideally playing the 4, or in the case of Towns, Naz, and Gobert, the 5. So Kyle Anderson is going to have to play the 3 to see the floor. And like Chris Finch won't have a problem with that because Kyle Anderson is a Swiss Army knife, as Chris Finch has called him multiple times before. He's versatile. He's switchable on the perimeter. He has that positional flexibility where he can guard multiple positions, really guard 1 through 5. Now he's going to be 30 and you don't really want him guarding certain guys, but has the ability to at least hold his own out there, knows what he's doing, knows the coverages. Is a really, really good overall, solid overall defender, better than solid. So I think you could play him at the 3 and feel comfortable with that. Weirdly enough, I also think he'll initiate less offense next year. He was the de facto point guard, the de facto backup point guard when Jordan McLaughlin was out for an extended period of time. And then late in the season, when McLaughlin was struggling, I mean, ideally it was Jalen Noel, but he was awful all season long. Anthony Edwards initiated some offense, but when he was on the bench, they needed somebody else. So Kyle Anderson was the guy to kind of be the straw to stir the drink with the second unit. Even when he was in the starting lineup as the starting power forward, he would come off the or come onto the floor with a lot of bench guys and would essentially run the second unit. Like we would see D'Lo take a rest and Kyle Anderson would take the floor with Anthony Edwards and Anderson would run the offense. And we saw this even after D'Lo was traded. I think Mike Conley is going to initiate a little more offense next year. So I think Mike Conley being on the team from day one and continuing to develop as a playmaker, and the team probably adding another point guard and or a healthy Jordan McLaughlin. Whether or not McLaughlin's back, I don't know. But there's going to be several other options to initiate offense. Kyle Anderson had a career high assist rate last year of over 22%, 22.6%, more than 4 points higher than his next highest assist rate for his career in year 9. He saw the assist rate jump as much as it did. Another way to say this would be like we could look at assists per game if that's an easier thing to digest. 4.9 assists per game. His next best was 3.6. So 1.3 assists more per game per 36, 6.2 assists per 36 minutes. However you want to slice it or dice it. Kyle Anderson passed the ball successfully a lot more this season than he had in the past. We did see, and this is a small piece of this, not small, a moderate piece of this. The Wolves struggled mightily with zone defenses, especially early in the season, and started to kind of overcome that when they put Kyle Anderson basically at the center of the zone and said, hey, distribute, like, hang out at the elbows, hang out at the nail, and, pick the defense apart. And we saw Anderson have a lot of success doing that. I think teams got smarter as the season wore on and began to solve that too. But in general, that was one of Kyle Anderson's main roles. That may be the primary way that he initiates offense this year. He may only kind of be that de facto point guard if an opposing team gets into a zone for a possession or two, because he has the size and the passing ability to kind of stand in the middle, survey the floor, and help the Wolves offense be successful that way. Otherwise, you got Mike Conley, you got Anthony Edwards, you have insert other point guard here, you have Jordan McLaughlin. Kyle Anderson probably isn't initiating as much offense next year. So I think he plays more three. He plays a lot more with Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, or Naz Reid and Towns, or Naz Reid and Gobert. I think all these things are possible. But I think we see the assist rate come down and he initiates less offense overall. But there's no reason why he can't have a very similar season in general in terms of his impact. Like, he did shoot a career high 41% from three. He actually, from the floor, he shot the ball extremely well too. It was, he shot the ball much better from 2-point range than he did the season prior in Memphis. Again, played a little bit of a different role. It was a career low rebound rate, but that was because he was initiating so much more offense. Even if by position title, he was playing more power forward. Again, he was initiating offense. He was on the perimeter more often. Also in these switchable defensive roles, the rebound rate came down. He didn't play center as much as he did in Memphis, right? So, like, obviously that rebound rate is going to come down. I think we'll see it come up a little. I think we'll see the assist rate come down a little. We'll see a more normal Kyle Anderson year, at least in terms of what he did, maybe the middle of his stint in Memphis. So less 5, a lot more at the 3 and the 4. I think he probably sees 2/3 to 3/4 of his minutes still at the 4, and a quarter to a third of his minutes at the 3. But such a valuable piece to what the Wolves do on both ends of the floor. And excited to have another season of slow-mo in Minnesota. And then now this time next year, we'll be talking about what do the Wolves do with slow-mo, right, when it comes to his future in Minnesota. Because that's obviously, like, it's never too early to start thinking about that. He signed a 2-year deal, right? So he gets paid $9.2 million next year. He's an unrestricted free agent next offseason. So will slow-mo be back in Minnesota the following year? That's exhausting to think about right now. But I really hope he's back. All right. That's all we got for you today. We'll, of course, be back on Monday and daily again next week, every day, Monday through Friday. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch the show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.